Military Specialist for Carleton County. I'm going to give you another presentation tonight. The next one on the timeline, part two of Case Yellow, Fall Gelb, is the invasion of Luxembourg. Um, as like I've mentioned, the invasion of Luxembourg directly coincides with the invasion of Holland and Belgium as well. So it's all starting on 750,000 troops are launching a massive attack, airborne and armored attack, blitzkrieg attack on Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And Luxembourg is just simply in the way. A small little country that's invaded and taken over in one day. Most of the country's taken in one day, and of course they are. And then of course this is they are defended by the French, but the French are pushed back. And so this in next, of course, right next to Luxembourg is France, and the invasion of France begins certainly after Luxembourg quickly capitulates. And so this is the overview of it. The German invasion of Luxembourg was part of Case Yellow, the German invasion of the Low Countries, right? So Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands, as I mentioned, and France during World War II. So France is the main target. They're just getting through these countries, and of course, they get air bases in Belgium and Holland, certainly to attack England and control the coast, control more of the European continent. The main target is France. So, but the battle began on May 10th, 1940, and this just lasted one day. Facing only light resistance, German troops quickly occupied Luxembourg. The Luxembourgish government and Grand Duchess Charlotte managed to escape the country, and a government in exile was created in London. So Pierre de Pong, from the 1st November 1885 to December 23rd, 1953, was a Luxembourgish politician and statesman. He was the 16th Prime Minister of Luxembourg, serving for 17 years from 5th of November 1937 until his death on 23rd of December 1953, and was also responsible at different times for the ministries of finance, the army, agriculture, labor, and social matters. His first government was the De Pong Career Ministry, 1937-1940. Between 1940 and 1944, De Pong led the Luxembourgish government in exile. That's in London, after Luxembourg had been occupied by Nazi Germany. He then presided over the Liberation Government, the National Union Government, and the De Pong Schwarz, and the De Pong Bodsen governments. So here, as you can see, Luxembourg is a small country in between Germany and Belgium, and this is the push, and they're pushing through Luxembourg to get into Belgium, and then they continue on through to Belgium and then to France. And and then of course France being down here, the French try to push up to defend them, but are pushed back. So Belgium, and so we have France down here. They're pushing into Luxembourg to attack Belgium, and then push down further into France in the low section through the Ardennes. Here's the Schuster line, and of course these are bridge barricades, road barricades, which don't last long. Hans Guderian and his Panzer forces. He is one of the main architects of Blitzkrieg. Certainly, from 1936 onward, he had pitched his proposal to even Hitler, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the German invasion began in 0435, when the 1st, 2nd, and 10th Panzer Divisions crossed the border at Wellendorf Pont, Varadin, and Echternach, respectively. Of course, Echternach is respectively in another area in that same direct area, and of course another entry point. Um, Wooden ramps were used to cross over the Schuster line, tank traps. Fire was exchanged, but the Germans did not encounter any significant resistance, save for some bridges destroyed and some landmines, since the majority of the Luxembourgish Volunteer Corps stayed in their barracks. The border was defended only by soldiers who had volunteered for guard duty and gendarmes. A handful of German secured gendarmes, local recruits, local militia groups. A handful of Germans secured the bridge at Wormelding, and captured the two customs officers there, who had demanded that they halt, but refrained from opening fire. The partly demolished bridge over the sewer at Eternacht was quickly repaired by engineers of the Gobdelsland Regiment, following the passage of the 10th Panzer Division. And these are Panzer I's, Panzer II's, and certainly Panzer III's to a smaller amount. Planes flew overhead, heading for Belgium and France. There were some stopped and landed troops within the country. So Heinz William Guderian, this is the main commander of this force. The 17th of June, 1888, the 14th of May, 1954. He survived the war. Was a German general during World War II, who after the war became a successful memoirist. An early pioneer and advocate for the Blitzkrieg approach, he played a central role in the development of the Panzer Division concept. In 1936, he became the inspector of motorized troops. At the beginning of the Second World War, Guderian led an armored corps in the invasion of Poland. During the invasion of France, he commanded the armored units that attacked through the Ardennes forest and overwhelmed the Allied defenses at the Battle of Sedan. In the 1930s, Guderian played a significant role in the development of both the Panzer Division concept and a doctrine of mechanized offensive warfare that would later become known as Blitzkrieg. Guderian's 3rd Motor Transport Battalion became the blueprint for the future German armored force. However, his role was less central than he claimed in his memoirs, and then historians repeated in the post-war era. So they certainly supported that in some concept. Historians later on and after the war. Guderian and his immediate superior Lutz had a symbolic relationship. Both men worked tirelessly with the shared aim of creating a panzer force. Guderian was the public face advocating mechanized warfare, and Lutz worked behind the scenes. Guderian reached into the Nazi regime to promote the panzer force concept, attract support, and secure resources. This included a demonstration of the concept to Hitler himself. Lutz persuaded, cajoled, and compensated for Guderian's often arrogant and argumentative behavior towards his peers. Captain Arkin repeatedly alerted his superiors at Lowey of this invasion. This is beginning the invasion of Luxembourg. As the captain in the Luxembourg force. But his reports never reached the Third Army at Metz. General Charles Conde, the Army's commander, was unclear of the situation, and at 0530 dispatched aerial reconnaissance units to investigate. At 0600, the French 3rd Light Cavalry Division was ordered to intervene. I think he's the Luxembourg Army, I think. Telephone and radio messages from the border posts to the Gendarmerie and Volunteer Corps headquarters formed the Luxembourgish government and Grand Ducal Court, and they informed them of the invasion. The Ducal Court of the invasion. That's the Luxembourgish government and their main court. Foreign Minister Joseph Bach, in the presence of Prime Minister Pierre de Pong, attempted to contact the German ambassador at the legation and at his private residence, but they were informed that he was present at neither. So he wasn't there. At 0630, the majority of the government, including Dupont and Beck, evacuated the capital by motorcade to the border town of Est Bodson, stayed behind the St. Esprit barracks to monitor the situation. In Est, a group of 125 German special operations troops had landed Befehlscher Storch, with orders to hold the area until the main invasion force arrived. So this is again operations forces. This is before the main force, the Guderian's forces arrive that area. A gendarme confronted the soldiers and asked that they leave, but of course he was taken prisoner. The government motorcade entered a roadblock at a crossroads manned by German units and was forced to detour through the countryside to avoid capture. The French ambassador Jean Trappier followed the government party but was stopped by the Germans and forced to return to the capital. Belgian ambassador Crevin de Merendier was also stopped by German soldiers at the border and ordered to turn back, as was the Luxembourgish Minister of Education, Nicolas Margueux, who had attempted to escape by taxi. Bodson later fled the capital, and having learned many of the secondary roads by memory, was able to navigate his way to France. Following consultation with her ministers, Grand Duchess Charlotte decided to abandon the palace. Accompanied by her husband, Prince Felix, her mother, the Grand Duchess Marie Anne, and members of the Grand Ducal suite. She departed and that's all members. They all departed for the border village of Redange. So Redange is this is of course before they're fleeing the country, village of Redange. After a brief stop, her party crossed the border at 07:45. Meanwhile, hereditary Grand Duke Jean and two of his sisters, accompanied by an aide-de-camp, Guillaume Bonsberg, were to wait at the border for confirmation of occupation. Around 0800 hours, the Prime Minister and his entourage passed over the border before making contact with French troops at Longueville. Last-minute telephone calls were made with Luxembourg City, revealed the capital to be completely surrounded, and completely with Guderian's forces, at least two of the three divisions. Charlotte's party was able to link up with the government motorcade at Longueuil, and of course Longueuil Est. Sorry, the group was delayed by a German roadblock, and they escaped when their chauffeur drove straight through the soldiers. So at least the party ultimately joined Charlotte and the Grand Ducal and government at Saint Menehould. Trying to pronounce that word. Menehould. Saint Menehould. At 0800 hours, elements of the French 3rd Light Cavalry Division under General Petiet, supported by the 1st Spah Brigade under Joseph, Colonel Joffault and the 2nd Company of the 5th Armored Battalion crossed the southern border to conduct a probe of German forces. These units later retreated behind the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line, of course, if you remember, is the major line of concrete and fixed gunnery defenses built in 1936 by the French military. The French defense put sunk a lot of money into it, and it proved useless because German forces, once they crossed through the Ardennes, came above it in the low side and swooped down above it and pushed forward into, and of course, eventually overtaking France in late June 1940. So the 5 Spendes were killed. 5 Spendes soldiers were killed. British Air Marshal Arthur Barrett, impatient with the reluctance of the French Air Force to conduct airstrikes, ordered a flight of Fairey battle bombers from the 226th Squadron to attack German tank columns. They went unescorted and encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire. Most were damaged by flak, but managed to escape. One received a direct hit and crashed near Bettendorf. German soldiers pulled the 3 injured crew from the burning wreckage, one of whom later died in a local hospital. So there's one famous picture of a child here at, of course, I think this is near or going to Luxembourg City, and this is where German forces are pushing forward. So the German soldiers, Hans Guderian's men, entering this section here into Luxembourg, had 50,000 soldiers and 600 tanks under his command. 50,000 soldiers, and Guderian's men were the main force pushing through Luxembourg and taking them within a day. Luxembourg had 425 soldiers and 246 gendarmes, local militia, not exactly the best trained. The French army had 18,000 soldiers there, but they were pushed back. The United Kingdom had like I just mentioned, the 225th Squadron RAF bomber force that tried to push back. So this is a little bit of just a touch about the gendarmes volunteers. On the 16th of February 1881, the Corps de Gendarmes et Volontaires, Corps of Gendarmes and Volunteers was established. It was composed of 2 companies, a company of gendarmes and one of volunteers. In 1939, a Corps of Auxiliary Volunteers was established and attached to the Company of Volunteers. Following the occupation of Luxembourg by Germany in May 1940, recruitment for the Company of Volunteers continued until 4th of December 1940, when they were moved to Weimar, Germany, to be trained as German police. And of course, that's after occupation. So here are some of them here. The Grand Ducal Gendarmerie resisted the German troops, but to little avail. The capital city was occupied before noon. The Gendarmerie chain of command in the south was thrown into disarray by the influx of the refugees and the arrival of German and French troops. Most gendarmes escorted refugees over the border, while some abandoned their posts and fled to France. Total Luxembourgish casualties amounted to 6 gendarmes and 1 soldier wounded, while 22 soldiers, 6 officers, and 60 non-commissioned officers and 54 gendarmes were captured. By the evening of the 10th of May 1940, most of the country, with the exception of the south, was occupied by German forces. More than 90,000 civilians fled from the canton of the canton of Est sur Alzette as a consequence of the advance. 47,000 evacuated to France, and 45,000 poured into the central and northern part of Luxembourg. So that's a pretty quick invasion. Luxembourg didn't stand a chance, of course. So they were placed under occupation, and eventually it was annexed into Germany in 1942. During the occupation, the German authorities orchestrated a program of Germanization of the country, suppressing non-German languages and customs, and conscripting Luxembourgers into the Wehrmacht, which led to extensive resistance, culminating in a general strike in August 1942 against conscription. The Germanization was facilitated by the collaborationist political group, the Volksted Volksted Bewegung, sorry. Of course, they were founded shortly after the occupation. Shortly before the surrender, the government had fled the country along with Grand Duchess Charlotte, eventually arriving in London, where a government exile was formed. Of course, Luxembourg soldiers also fought in Allied units until liberation, and that was later, 1944, I believe. And there we go. Next one will be Belgium.